Saint Valentine, retold and illustrated by Robert Sabuda. In the ancient city of Rome, there lived a humble and gentle man. His clothes were not as fine as the nobleman's, and his leather sandals were worn thin. He did not live in a grand house made of smooth marble, but in a small dwelling in a crowded part of the city. The man's friends and neighbors called him Valentine. Valentine was a physician and practiced his trade in the tiny second room of his home. In that room stood a cabinet full of bowls and jars and held herbs and powders. There were glass and ceramic pots filled with animal fat and beeswax, and jugs of wine, milk, and honey that Valentine mixed with his medicines so they would not taste bitter. When the ill or injured came to see Valentine, he would show them into the tiny room and examine them carefully. He cleaned wounds with wine and vinegar and bandaged them with fresh cloth. Or he might grind up herbs and roots in a small bowl to ease a visitor's pain. When it came time for the patient to pay, Valentine would only accept what could be offered: a jug of wine, baked bread, or a new pair of sandals. If the patient had nothing, Valentine would say, "It was but a few herbs and prayer that have healed you, my friend," and sent him on his way. Prayer was an important part of Valentine's life too. But where most people in the city prayed to the many Roman gods, Valentine and a small group of others prayed to a single god. The Romans did not like these people, called Christians, who worshipped only one god. Whenever anything bad happened in the city, the Romans almost always blamed the Christians, even if they had nothing to do with it. Sometimes the Christians were put in prison or killed. Knowing the danger of his beliefs, Valentine, who was a priest of the Christians, prayed for each of his patients, but only after nightfall. One afternoon, a man with a small child came to Valentine's door. The man worked as a jailer at the emperor's prison and had heard about the priest's healing powers. Valentine took the girl's hand and led her and her father into his examining room. The child seemed well, but when Valentine held up the oil lamp for a closer look, he realized why the father had come. "She has been blind since birth," said the jailer. "Can you give her sight?" Although he knew that blindness was one of the most difficult things to cure, Valentine vowed to do his best. From the cabinet, he took down a precious copper box filled with a wet, waxy paste and dabbed a little into each corner of the child's eyes. The jailer thanked Valentine and tried to pay, but the priest refused. "I cannot accept payment when it is doubtful the child will regain her sight. Bring her again next week, and I will apply more ointment." The jailer and his daughter thanked the priest and were gone. That night, like every night, Valentine prayed for his patient, but he prayed longest for the jailer and his child. The father and daughter returned the following week and again the week after. Each time, Valentine applied a small amount of the waxy paste, but the child's eyes remained sightless. After so many visits, the three soon became good friends. Sometimes while the jailer stood guard at the prison, the priest took the child along with him while he gathered herbs and plants for his medicines. Together they walked outside the city gates and down the old stone road until they reached the countryside. In spring, the fields were covered with bright golden crocuses, the first flowers to bloom in Rome after winter. While Valentine gathered white mandrake root for curing headaches, the child would gather bouquets of yellow and orange crocuses to give to her father when the priest brought her home. Weeks went by until one day Valentine, who was expecting the knock of the jailer and his daughter at the door, heard instead the heavy pounding of Roman soldiers. The soldiers burst in and began to destroy everything in the physician's home. They smashed to pieces the cabinet full of medicine. The precious copper box with the eye ointment spilled to the floor. Before he knew what had happened, Valentine was led to the emperor's prison and put in a dark, cold cell. When the jailer heard of the priest's arrest, he hurried to the cell. "There has been an uprising in the streets and the Christians are being blamed," he told Valentine. "Many have been imprisoned. The emperor has ordered it. There is nothing I can do." Valentine slowly nodded and asked for a pen and ink and something to write on, which the jailer hurried to get. When he came back, the priest quickly wrote on the scrap of papyrus and handed it back to the jailer. "Please give this to your child," he said, and grasped the man's hand in farewell. Later, 2 soldiers came to Valentine's cell and took the priest away as the jailer watched helplessly. When the jailer returned home that day, he was greeted by his daughter. He slipped the scrap of papyrus out of his waist belt, unrolled it, and handed it to the child. "What does it say, father?" asked the child as a yellow crocus fell from the small scroll into her hand. "From your Valentine," her father read. Slowly, the child held up the blossom before her face and for the first time watched its color dazzle like the rays of the afternoon sun. Here is some more information on who St. Valentine was and actually what happened to him. Valentine was executed on AD February 14, 270, during one of the persecutions ordered by Emperor Claudius II Gothicus. Pope Julius I supposedly built a basilica, which is a Christian church with Roman features, over Valentine's grave. In AD 496, Pope Gelasius I named February 14 as St. Valentine's Day. However, the practice of sending love messages on February 14th does not originate solely from Valentine's note to the jailer's blind daughter, who, it was said, truly did regain her sight. The tradition is tied instead to the ancient Roman feast of Lupercalia, which took place on February 15th. One of the customs on this occasion involved the writing of love messages by maidens. The messages were placed in a large urn and then drawn out by unmarried men who courted the girls whose messages they had picked. The 2 dates, February 14th and 15th, came to signify one event, the celebration of love and St. Valentine. In France and England during medieval times, people also believed that at the start of the second week of the second month, February 14th, the birds found partners and began to mate. The crocus is the traditional flower of St. Valentine's Day.